Welcome to the Urban Agorist Podcast, episode number 9. My name is James, and today I'm excited to be joined by Libertarian activist and personal development coach Miguel Duque from amagi.life. Before we get started, let me tell you about the best gift for guys who already have enough socks. The Woodwick candles at Wax and Wick. These candles have masculine yet sophisticated scents like whiskey, espresso, blue pine, and mountain fig. But best of all, these candles are clean. The candles you buy in stores are made from wax derived from waste oil left over from the refining process of gasoline. It's best not to breathe that stuff, especially when you have the option to burn the organic soy wax, natural fragrance, and clean-burning wood wicks of the Wax and Wick candle. Their clean burn also won't leave those ugly black marks on walls and furniture. Wax and Wick candles are the perfect holiday gift for the guy in your life. Head to urbanagorist.com/candle to stock up. And with that, let's hear from Miguel Duque. Miguel, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hey, James. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show, and congrats on creating this great show on a, great topic. It's much needed, urban agorist. When I heard the name of the show, I was just like, oh yeah, heck yeah, I'll go on that. So yeah, my name is Miguel, and I live up here in Bellevue, Washington. It's like the greater Seattle area. I'm 15 minutes east of Seattle. Not the best place, for freedom loving people right now, but, there's a lot of good about it too. And I am a business coach, a realtor. I am involved with the Libertarian Party here locally. And, as you know, you and I met through the LP Mises caucus. So that's a bit about me. And I am, the creator and, author of amagi.life. That's my website, which is actually the URL as well, amagi.life, where I write about coaching and liberty stuff and pretty much anything that is on my mind.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link to that as well in the show notes. Talk a little bit. So we met in person at the LP convention this past summer, 2020. It was a pretty fun time. The Mises Caucus was hosting a big party. We had karaoke and drinks and all that stuff. But I have kind of fallen away from LP stuff just in general. I didn't vote for Joe Jorgensen. I have been completely underwhelmed by everything that's been happening in 2020, and I've completely given up on not podcasting. I obviously have not given up on podcasting because I'm doing this. I've given up on politics. Where are you at as far as that goes?
Oh, well, where I'm at is I don't really blame anybody for, being disinterested or interested in more in other things. I really don't necessarily feel a need to convince anybody one way or another, whether they need to get involved in the LP or do something else. What I do think is that folks who kind of are in the LP and just type of libertarians that really do really obsess with politics and stuff like that. It's like, hey, cool as a hobby, just realize that, you've got to take care of yourself, take care of your own life. You gotta really you own yourself, right? And at the end of the day, pretty much your own success and happiness and freedom all comes down to the actions and the choices that you take, and not necessarily the success or accomplishments of any organization, whether that's the LP or otherwise. It's really all up to you individually. So I think that there are a lot of people, a lot of libertarians they might even be really hardcore libertarians or anarchists or whatever, that don't necessarily take a lot of direct action that they should be taking in their own life, So yeah, I don't blame you at all. Even though I am still involved, I'm the chair of my local party. I've kind of been using it as a platform to get people involved in other things too, like Freedom Cells, freedomcells.org, which is, a project developed by a friend of mine, John Bush, and Derek Bros down in Texas, that I'm a big fan of. I think more libertarians should get involved in that.
You went to college in Texas, right?
Yeah, actually, I'm from Houston originally.
Okay. Did you know John and Derek, or I think they're in Austin, right?
John's in Austin, John Bush, and Derek is in Houston. So yeah, I have met Derek a couple times, and I actually haven't met John in person. I really need to fix that. I'm trying to get him up here, or trying to, meet up in an event or something. But yeah, real good guys. I grew up and, was born and raised in Houston, and I went to school at Texas A&M, which is about an hour and a half outside of Houston.
So you're an LP member and an Aggie. I won't hold that against you, though. It's okay.
Oh, why is that? Are you a Longhorn or anything like that?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas, and my dad went to UT, so
no way.
It was big in my family. Yeah. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about sort of. I guess I could see the LP as even more of like a social club than a viable political party. Do you see any value in that? Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is there's no central, really unified vision for the LP right now, which is, I think, what all the issues come from. There are warring factions that see the LP as just purely about winning elections, and then there's others that see it purely about education, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's really what it comes down to is as an organization, there's really no clarity as to the vision, despite what some people might tell you. Just if you look at it, that there's a lot of disagreement and there's a lot of division around the mission and the vision in the first place. And if you look to the statement of principles, the very first statement of the very first sentence of the statement of principles is, we, the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. And, I don't know it all by heart, but I know that's the first sentence. Yeah. And that I love. Yeah. Hey, sign me up for that. Challenging the cult of the omnipotent state, right? That's exactly what we've got to do, because nothing will change in the world until it changes in people's minds. And that's something that I believe as a coach, that I've learned and that I've seen is true, is that it's not this hocus pocus kind of like airy fairy stuff where everything is manifested in your thoughts. Like, yeah, there's physical reality that's kind of outside of your control. But at the end of the day, what you have in your life, your relationships and how you spend your time and what kind of job you work and where you live, it all comes really from your thoughts. If you believe that you deserve a certain type of life, or that's just what you can get and that's what you settle for, then that's what you get in the real world. So I mean, nothing will change until it changes in people's thoughts. So we definitely have to challenge the cult of the omnipotent state in people's beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Talk about coaching a little bit. So you're a certified coach through the One Thing and also through MAPS, which I think both of those are affiliated with Gary Keller, right? Of the Keller Williams real estate kind of giant. Is that right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, MAPS Business Coaching is a coaching company started by Gary Keller, who a lot of people might not even know about, even though he is now, his company, Keller Williams, is the largest real estate brokerage or franchise rather in the world, in over 40 companies. He started off in Austin, Texas, and with a single office in Austin, Texas with him and his business partner, and they have now grown to like 180,000 associates worldwide. And he started up a coaching company that actually provides coaching outside of real estate to entrepreneurs, small business owners, even executives, nonprofit leaders, like anybody who can benefit, any type of professional who can benefit from professional business and personal growth coaching can enroll in MAPS Business Coaching. And so that's been a lot of fun, because I've taken what I have learned from my real estate career, because I did come from the Keller Williams world. I was a real estate agent. I was a recruiter, a branch manager, kind of sales manager type of role, where I did a lot of recruiting and consulting and training and coaching through that. And I'm now taking that and expanding beyond real estate.
What is the MAPS or the one thing kind of methodology? What would it be like to be a Miguel Duque coaching client?
Oh, well, yeah, you mentioned the one thing, and so Gary Keller's book, The One Thing, the concepts from that really kind of set the foundation for the methodology in a lot of ways. So I highly recommend that book to anybody, really anybody, whether you are a business professional or otherwise. It's just an amazing book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. And the tagline or the subtitle is The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. And the whole concept of the book pretty much is for example, there's the focusing question. It's a tool, just a question that you ask yourself in a number of different contexts. The question is, what is the one thing I can do right now, or in different contexts this week or this month or this year, such that by doing that one thing, everything else is easier or unnecessary? And you essentially apply that focusing question to different areas of your life or your business or your goals in a given time frame. And there are a lot of tools that have been built around the book, The One Thing, and the concepts therein, which are amazing for helping people prioritize their life. I mean, it really comes down to, and this is kind of where I fuse it with libertarianism, is that I believe that you own yourself and you own your life. And you get to make a decision about what your life is going to be about. So it kind of starts with having clarity about what you choose to make the purpose of your life. Like after it's all said and done, pretty much what will you have stood for? What impact will you have made on the world? And that's what we'd call your mission statement. And so that's something that I've been passionate about is since crafting my mission statement several years ago. I feel like it's brought a lot more clarity into my life, and I love to help other people do that too. And basically like work backwards from there, like thinking with the end in mind. When you have that clarity of what you want your life's mission and purpose and legacy to be, then work backwards from there and figure out, okay, what does my life need to look like 5 years from now in order for me to be on track for that lifelong mission or legacy? And if that's what it needs to look like 5 years from now, then what might it need to look like this year based on that 5-year goal? And that's what we'd call goal setting to the now, where you start really, really big and then you scale back down to, okay, yeah, that's what it looks like in 1 year, 1 month, this week, pretty much. And what's the one thing that I can do? Okay. So it's not like you got to take inventory of your options, right? What's available to you? The next domino to knock over. What's the one thing I can do right now, such that by doing that, everything else is easier or unnecessary? And that's in perspective of that bigger mission and that bigger purpose. These are really kind of like big, very, very abstract, but we've got tools that are awesome for helping people incorporate it in a very, very practical way. So
Great. So what is your personal mission statement, if you don't mind disclosing?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. Well, mine now, as of a few years ago, it is to lay the foundations for a voluntary, peaceful world through leadership, philosophy, and love. I actually, it's kind of I wrote it in that form, I think, actually maybe a couple years ago. It's been to lay the foundations for a voluntary, peaceful world for at least a few years. And that's after having been like an anarchist for like 10 years. Because I think I became an anarchist in actually maybe 8 years ago in 2012, just after the Ron Paul revolution, and that election cycle kind of definitely woke me up to a lot. And it was only a few years back that I even realized kind of really like, yeah, that is really my mission, is just freedom and peace, and to lay the foundations for a world where that's people's experience, is that everybody gets to experience freedom, self-ownership, peace. And I think that what that requires is essentially leadership and philosophy and love for one another. And I think of it in terms of leadership, starting with self-leadership, like making those decisions about what do you want your life to be about, and what are you going to be willing to say no to in order to say yes to that real higher purpose that you're called to. And self-leadership in terms of basically doing the work, taking action and failing forward and not giving up. And so, yeah, I really think that being missing makes it impossible or that being lacking makes it impossible to have a voluntary, peaceful world, is because people, instead of acting like leaders in their own life, really just defer a lot of their decisions to authority figures, whether it's government or it's, it could be any number of people, right? So rather than to defer your own life leadership and decision making to other people, you got to take ownership of your life and become a leader for yourself and for your family.
What does failing forward look like?
Well, it's not fun, and it doesn't look pretty, and it looks messy and embarrassing. It looks like you figure out, okay, voluntary, peaceful world, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to become the chair of the Libertarian Party and hoorah, right? And you realize like, okay, well, actually there's some kind of adjustment here that maybe I'm a little further on track than I was before, because I was extremely apolitical since about that 2012 presidential election. I was extremely apolitical. I was like, and for good reason too. I mean, I was definitely just, wanting to achieve freedom in my own life and build financial freedom and grow in my career. And so I did those things in a lot of ways. And one thing that was lacking was kind of like, a community of like-minded people. I mean, aside from basically like listening to the Tom Woods show, I didn't know any libertarians, at least besides people that I knew from Ron Paul days. And then I moved up to Washington because I got a job up here as a branch manager for one of our Keller Williams offices. And so what failing forward looks like is just when you figure out what is that greater purpose, or what's the goal, the one thing that kind of leads up to that, is kind of just looks like taking action towards it, even if you don't know everything you need to know. You might not have all the experience or the skills that you need yourself. It's just a matter of, once you have the clarity of what you want, going after it, and you're never going to get it on the first try. And so it kind of just, it looks really messy. It looks like learning through mistakes, which pretty much is how most people learn. So the more mistakes that you make, the more you're going to learn, and the more successful you're going to be in the long run. And that's one thing that Gary Keller says a lot, that, I've learned from him a lot. So I definitely, especially when people ask me about it, I'll tell people a lot about things I've learned from Gary Keller, because he talks about, you fail your way to success. And pretty much anybody who's like him, a self-made billionaire or millionaire or whatever, they made a lot of really messy mistakes all throughout their life. And so it looks like failure. Failing forward really does look like failure, but it's kind of just a matter of, when you take a step back, then just, don't just stop there. Try to take 2 steps forward.
Let's get back to the one thing a little bit. So can you kind of summarize that concept? What does the one thing mean? Is it literally one thing, or is it like a stack of one things that can very easily become overwhelming again?
Well, that's a great question. And one thing that basically that is a common saying in the one thing community is that success is sequential, not simultaneous.
Mhm.
It's a sequence of one things at any given time. Yeah, there's like I was just talking about goal setting to the now of what's my one thing for my life. That would be your mission statement. And now based on that, what's my one thing for 5 years from now? What would be my one goal based on my life's mission for 5 years from now, right? And then what would be 1 year, et cetera. But there's different areas of our lives, right? There's not just our career, or there's not just our finances. There's our health. There's our family and our key relationships. There's our spiritual life, which whatever that means to you, whether or not you're religious, which I'm not personally. And I do still think about sort of like spiritual fulfillment and health, just from a secular sort of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all these different areas of our life. And so there's not just one thing. There's one thing at any given time. And it's basically, it does kind of come down to how you spend your time. Are you focusing on one thing at a time? Or are you letting yourself be distracted or be inhibited by attempting to multitask, which generally leads to poor results? It leads to failure or to really not reaching your full potential. So even though that's something that a lot of people boast is, oh, I'm great at multitasking.
Yeah.
So yeah. And even there are a lot of employers and jobs that insist that you must be a good multitasker to do this job. And the reality is like, okay, what that means is you do need to be able to counterbalance a lot of different competing interests and priorities and tasks and things. And it's just kind of a mindset of this kind of goes back to like old Eastern wisdom. And then even you'll hear, there's a quote from the Dalai Lama, right? Who says something along the lines of, when I eat, I eat. When I pray, right? It's like when you're doing something, like be present and be present in that one thing. And I know a lot of people, and whether they're entrepreneurs, business owners or not, a lot of times, let's say they're at work, they're actually thinking about not being at work. They're thinking about, maybe they're feeling guilty, like, man, I shouldn't be at work right now. I should be with my kids. I should be with my loved ones. I should be doing all these other things. And then when they're not at work and they're at home with their kids or the loved ones, they're thinking, oh man, these deadlines and all this work I got to do, and I should be working right now. And so on the one hand, it's kind of being, the one thing is about being present in the moment and allowing yourself to say yes to one thing and saying no to everything else. Right? Because if you don't make that decision, then other people will make it for you. If you don't make that decision about your life's purpose or about what your individual goals are, then other people are just going to make the decisions for you, and they're just going to kind of use you as a tool to meet their needs.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a libertarian who is trying to, and especially like an agorist who is really trying to separate themselves and opt out from the system, that is at the same time trying to tug at, every single string that they've got dangling? They've got their email box, and they've got their political meetups, or their Facebook friends that are preaching heresy online, and all of the other little distractions that come in their way of actually living a free life.
Yeah. I mean, that's always going to be the challenge. That sounds like, you asking that makes me feel like, well, I don't know, I'm going through that too. Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. What would I tell somebody going through that? Well, I guess for me, like when I feel a sense of overwhelm, or there's too many things I'm trying to juggle, or whatever. I mean, for me, it does a lot of times go back to the mission statement, which isn't really just, it's not just a sentence or a phrase or a set of words. It's like a filter for how you look at the world. So I kind of, when I feel a sense of overwhelm, that I do just remember, like, I own myself, I own my life, and I'm sovereign over all these decisions. At the end of the day, it's up to me to make these decisions, and nobody can force me to, unless they're actually like holding a gun to my head, right? I can, I get to decide who I'm going to spend my time with and what I'm going to say yes to, what I'm going to say no to. And I look at it through the filter of, is this thing actually right now what I need to do to lay the foundations for a voluntary, peaceful world? Or is this moving me forward in that direction, or is it not? So it's kind of a filter for me. But aside from that, even if you feel like you have some sense of clarity around that mission and sort of, you know, your values and your vision for your life, then realize that, I mean, it definitely will be messy and uncomfortable and require saying no to a lot, probably to most things. It'll look different for everybody, but what it's looked like for me, I've definitely decommitted from a lot of things this year. I've switched a lot of things up in my life. And even just recently, like, I finally, after like 15 years of being on Facebook, pretty much since high school, and practically growing up on that thing, I have, I've gotten off of it permanently, and I deleted Instagram too, and I don't plan to go back to any of those types of platforms. And I've been off of it for about a couple weeks now, and pretty happy with that. I mean, it was definitely uncomfortable to do, but I think a very worthwhile decision. And that's just an example of, probably there's a lot of things that we know we need to do, and they're just really hard because we got to say no to somebody, or we might disappoint somebody. And at the end of the day, we have to choose to live up to our responsibility to ourselves rather than to disappoint somebody else.
Yeah, you actually posted about that on your blog here recently. Basically, well, here's just a quote. You said, ultimately, my mission is to lay the foundations for a voluntary and peaceful world. And Facebook, along with the other big tech platforms, are being used to manipulate and coerce entire populations, and they are thus antithetical to my mission. I think that's really powerful. And the thing is, they're also so manipulative that they make weak-willed people like myself feel obligated to stay on them. I'm tweeting several times a day. I'm engaged in all kinds of conversations on Facebook. None of them public, mind you, because I'm not courageous enough to make my posts public. But, you know, inside of groups, friends only type posts, that kind of thing. And I feel like I'm making a difference, but I'm really not. Talk a little bit about, I mean, did it take some resolve to leave the platforms?
It did. And it took, I felt like it was a long time coming, but particularly this year, I'd been finding myself repeatedly thinking like, oh, it's only a matter of time before I'm just off of these things. And I wasn't thinking of it in terms of necessarily like I'll get banned, because that's absolutely likely. If sure. I think anybody who's really like kind of saying things that need to be said that are extremely true right now, kind of is susceptible to being banned or censored on those platforms or whatever. But for me, it was just kind of like, yeah, I know that this is really taking away from me. So that filter of looking at the world, is this moving me forward in my mission or not? It's just been the gut reaction for me internally with regard to Facebook is no, that's definitely not really moving me forward. It did take some resolve. And at the end of the day, I'm also treating it as like an experiment. Initially, I got off not necessarily thinking like, this is it, I'm permanently logging off of Facebook for the last time ever, I was kind of just treating it as a spontaneous hiatus, if you will. And then a week into it, I was like, I don't want to go back to that thing at all, because like this is easier to not have to worry about it, to not have to stare at it constantly and to check every notification that comes in and stuff. It's just like, yeah, I am probably interacting with fewer people, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. This year as a whole has definitely been that way a lot. It's like, oh yeah, social distancing is just this weird dystopian concept lately. But at the end of the day, I also thrive off of, I think I do thrive off of solitude oftentimes, and personal time. I'm what, like, some people describe themselves as an extroverted introvert, you know?
Yeah.
Someone who is kind of an introvert at heart, but I like to be social, and I'm kind of a social butterfly, and I, get involved in a lot of things and meet a lot of new people. And where I really recharge and fill myself up is in my alone time, or just quality time with my wife, at home. I'm really a homebody when it comes down to it. So I've treated this whole year as kind of an experiment, like, oh, okay, now we're kind of being forced to cease some of our typical social interactions. So I'm kind of treating it as like an experiment, like, all right, we'll see, if I just stop this or that kind of social interaction, well, we'll see kind of who reaches out to me or whatever. I'm not just going to be, a hermit or a total recluse forever. And I'm working on rebuilding connections, whether it's virtual connections or real life day-to-day connections. We're kind of like rebuilding that back up, but it kind of feels like a clean slate. If anything, even if it was uncomfortable at first, it just feels so like such a weight lifted off of me. Like, I just got a clean slate, and I can kind of just do whatever I really want to do, So
yeah, that's pretty great. It's admirable. I feel like there's a lot of people doing that right now as well. A lot of people in kind of our sphere, leaving the various social networks. I know Jack Spirko's made a big deal out of leaving Facebook. And I see that you're also on Odyssey, which is a great video platform to compete with YouTube, that's based on a blockchain, which I think is really cool. My videos are all going to be cross-posted there, although I think probably YouTube will still be my default video platform. I'd like to hear about more how you live your mission in just regular old day-to-day life. Like if you're showing a house, or if you're leading your team at Keller Williams, or whatever it is, how are you laying foundations for a voluntary and peaceful world in settings that don't give a crap about a voluntary and peaceful world?
Well, I think back to like kind of some of the years that I've spent, being a recruiter and sales team leader and stuff like that. And I feel like the way I always approached it was, I'm helping people build their own success for themselves and their family, so they can be, I always looked at it that way, like, yeah, they can be less dependent on the state because they've built up their own business, right? As a real estate agent, or, they've built up their real estate career so they could build financial freedom, build their active income and their passive income, and invest and save. And my wife and I are followers, fans of Dave Ramsey. And about 5 years ago, it was about 5 years ago, accomplished getting debt free, and have been debt free since then, which is a great thing. I think that's really
nice.
important.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I've always looked at it that way. I mean, at least in terms of what I did in real estate, or helping people buy a home, so that they can also similarly build their financial freedom, because that's one of the few, when you think about sort of this whole fiat sort of economy that we live in,
Mm-hmm.
one of the oldest and still the realest types of property, we call it real property, that you can own, is real estate, and there's only so much land that exists. So there's a lot of scarcity in that, and the population keeps growing, and demand keeps growing and growing. And we keep innovating with our building standards and increasing higher density housing and things like that. But we're not making more land. So until we start space-steading or seasteading, there's a finite amount of land. And it's kind of similar with, that's part of where the subjective value of precious metals, come from, or other similar like scarce resources, is their scarcity. So, I mean, I believe in real estate in terms of a store of value and an asset and an investment. And I think it's a really powerful way that if you look at the basic statistics of, folks who own their home versus folks who don't, the numbers are staggering in terms of net worth and overall economic security. So I think that is a very worthwhile thing to pursue for anybody, is to pursue homeownership, which, I'm young, and so I'm actually still working on that myself. My wife and I just turned 30, and we plan to be homeowners sooner. But yeah, we're now pretty on track to do that by February. So that's exciting. And I mean, I guess in my day-to-day life, like, I do talk to people whenever. I don't typically get into political or philosophical or those types of conversations with folks.
God, I hate people who do, so I'm glad you don't.
No, but if somebody asks me, then I'll happily explain the concept of self-ownership, and I'll do that any day, anytime, with anybody. I love to talk about that. I mean, it is part of my mission, and I do think that that's part of the foundations of a voluntary, peaceful world, is opening people up to that idea that they are a powerful, beautiful, self-owning individual that actually has a lot of power in their own life. You don't have to just sit back and be a slave and do what people tell you. And you don't have to be part of this collectivist way of thinking. So yeah, I mean, I'll definitely inject that into my conversations and my choices and, my overall relationships.
Tell me about amagi. How did you come across that? Oh, well, first, tell us what it means, because not everybody knows you and what it means. But also, how did you discover this ancient word?
Oh, sure. I'm not sure where I heard of it first. I know it was about 2012 as well. That was a pretty big year for me. I was graduating college, and I'd found out about Ron Paul the year before, and my wife and I even got on a Greyhound bus from Texas up to Iowa, and we campaigned for Dr. Paul in the Caucasus of Iowa in like 0-degree weather. We were knocking on doors and doing phone banking and stuff like that, and we met a bunch of cool people. And then we came back from that, and after graduating, I did some paid political activism with the Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit based in Virginia that they train activists. They like do training for campaign professionals and media professionals, and also campus leaders, campus students and faculty involved in liberty related organizations. So I went to Arizona on as a field representative for the Leadership Institute, and whether or not this was directly where I heard of amagi from, I know it was my friend Adam Beck, who still lives in Arizona, and he told me about this word amagi, or someone there in Arizona told me about this word amagi, which is an ancient Sumerian word. So Sumer basically is like modern day Iraq, and it's kind of more or less the cradle of civilization or whatever, where kind of humans came from theoretically. And it's basically the oldest known written language. There are clay tablets from like 3000 BC roughly that were discovered by anthropologists and decoded. And, you know, there's this author named Samuel Kramer, who is an Assyriologist and an anthropologist specifically studying the old Assyrian, like Sumer and Babylon and all these like old ancient cultures there in modern day Iraq, basically. There was this one word on these tablets called amagi. And it basically, as he describes in his writings, Samuel Kramer, he basically says this was the earliest known written word for the concept of liberty. It literally translates to, so amagi literally translates to return to the mother. And I always found that really interesting because that phrase would mean liberty, because to me, it kind of is like return to nature, like the mother being kind of like Mother Earth, or return to nature. In other words, kind of return to natural law, like return to spontaneous order and the natural order, which is freedom. Because what essentially happened in these clay tablets, what was described in these clay tablets with respect to the word amagi, was it was used to describe a policy or a set of policies by this guy named Urukugina, who became the king in a town called, I'm just spitting out a lot of random factoids, right? But it's this interesting story about this. There in ancient Sumeria, or ancient Sumer, it was all just independent city-states. So it wasn't like a big empire or anything like that, like we see in modern day. It was just all independent city-states. So each little city was their own state. And there was this one city-state, I want to say called Galash. And over the years, over some probably centuries, there were a series of usurpations and corruption and centralization of power into the hands of the political elites and the religious elites, for that matter, because back in those days, it was very much like theocratic government, and the priests or the spiritual leaders were also very, very politically powerful. And they basically like enacted all kinds of new taxes and restrictions or regulations. A lot of people wound up pretty much living in debt slavery due to being overtaxed. And they basically, a lot of people lost their land. They might have been landowners, farmers that owned their own land, that had their land taken away, had to work in indentured servitude or whatever. And this king named Urukugina came into power, and he just did away with like all of it. And he just was like, no, we're setting all these slaves free. People are getting their land back. We're taking the power away from these corrupt priests or whatever. And so they called that amagi. It was, return to the mother, return to natural law and freedom. So that's pretty inspiring to me, because I see that as just an example of how old this sort of struggle, or quest that we're on really is. It's so just central to the human experience, is the quest for freedom.
Yeah. And actually the first sourced definition of amagi on Wikipedia is freedom from debt. So it makes sense that, exemption from debts or obligation. It makes sense that would be a primary thing for you, being also a fan of Dave Ramsey and getting out of debt and all that. So
kind of crazy how that all ties together, because debt has for so long been a tool to enslave people, literally.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably why the ancient Hebrews had their Jubilee years, where they would just cancel all debts every 50 years. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that they believed, look, we can do business with each other, but there's something higher than us that actually takes precedence. Which earlier you mentioned, being that you're pretty secular, you're not a religious person, but also spirituality is something that's important to you. Can you talk a little bit about that? I was talking with Vin Armani the other day, and he is a proponent of this idea that we're entering, or maybe in the midst of, an age of what he's calling magic, what I'm calling, I don't know, some sort of blend of superstition and like psychological manipulation, and the current elevation of scientists as sort of the priestly class. Is something that's at once troubling, but also just very interesting. It's sort of this new form of secular spirituality, and I'm incapable of spirituality. I've just resigned myself to that fact. I have been religious and I've been secular, and I've towed the line between the two, but I've never been a spiritual person. I attempted to get into a habit of meditation, and it just didn't work. So anyway, I'd like to know about your spirituality, and if there are any, your spiritual practices, even just down to, something that you remind yourself of every day.
Oh man, that's it's a great question. I mean, it's like you've really got me thinking over here, because yeah, I know I did just say that, like I do think in terms of spiritual growth, but I'm I'm an atheist. I've been, that was kind of like in my somewhat younger days, one of my first experiences of kind of having to rebuild my own worldview, sort of having my world turned upside down, before libertarianism or anything like that. It was like religion. And, I kind of probably started off as something like agnostic or whatever. And whether, atheist versus agnostic nowadays, I don't really like put a lot of thought into it, to be honest. But what I do recognize, even being a secular person, is I just have a personal sort of love for and respect for and gratitude for nature, this natural world that we live in, whether it's Earth or the universe as a whole. It's just miraculous to me how everything has played out, such that we have this planet that we get to live on, and we have such diverse life, such advanced life for that matter. And as advanced as life forms as we are relative to everything else, we are just organic beings, primates. And, we have just these sort of, limitations and such of the natural world, maybe not even limitations per se, but the way I just look at it, and this goes back to like my mission and my vision. Part of my vision for my life is really connection to nature. Mm-hmm. And so even though I am currently, I would say, an urban agorist, it's really, in February, my wife and I are planning to move out of quote unquote the city and getting a bit of land. And we really just want to live more in connection to nature. So when it comes to spirituality or spiritual fulfillment or growth, for me, a lot of that has always been connection to nature. So whenever we do get out of the city and when we're out in the woods, foraging or picking mushrooms or just hiking or just kind of like learning about all these different plants, or we go to the coast, right? And we go to the beach and we dig razor clams, and we, I feel like we're sort of participating in this primal spiritual activity of connecting with nature at the most base level. Like when we found our very first wild mushroom up here in the Northwest, it was such a memorable experience. It was just like, wow, to find food out in the wilderness. Nobody put this food here. Like nobody planted this mycelium that grew this mushroom here. It just happened, It just happened as a product of these natural processes, and now we found it. Like, we've just participated in this age old, it goes goes back way further than humanity. I see it as like, going back to kind of the idea of, return to the mother, return to the natural order. Like, I think we have a lot to learn from nature. And so with respect to spirituality, for me, it's a lot of that. It's a lot of just kind of like connecting with nature and living in a way that's a little bit more in harmony with nature.
Wow, that's great. That's definitely not something that I have ever done. And in fact, I think the reason that I started something called Urban Agorist is because I don't feel capable of doing things like that. Like, I go camping and like I don't find beauty in nature. Maybe I don't know if that's a flaw or a feature of my personality. I find a lot more beauty in technology and the built environment of a city. That said, cities are becoming increasingly dangerous places, especially for people who are free thinkers or who value liberty. And so I'm gonna have to figure out something to do.
No, yeah, I don't think that's like anything wrong with you, for what it's worth. Because like I said, I've grown up. I've lived in the city all my life. So I even kind of got this limiting belief of thinking that I'm like some kind of poser or whatever that is just like every other millennial who wants to get out of the city and buy some land. Right.
Right.
But, because I've only ever known city life. I'm not a farmer. I'm not an experienced homesteader. And the fact is, like, everybody's got to start somewhere. But when I think about it, of like when my wife and I start a family, hopefully pretty soon, and are raising our kids, like, kind of like what kind of life do we want to give them? Do we want for them to just only have, just like us, basically the city life where you go to school or you go to work or whatever, and you get all your food from the grocery store, that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, we have been following Jack Spirko a lot and learning a lot from the dude. He's badass.
Yeah.
And it's small things for right now, even since we don't yet have land. We're in a 1,000 square foot condo. On the fourth floor, we don't have any kind of like actual outdoor space other than we've got a pretty big wraparound balcony that we've got some planter boxes out there. These things called earth boxes. They're pretty cool. You just pour water down the spout and there's like an internal reservoir on the bottom that waters the plants. And we grow a bit of veggies out there, but earlier this year, it was after lockdowns and all that stuff. And after we finally started listening to Jack Spirko and their survival podcast, he's got this YouTube playlist on his channel where he breaks down building what he calls the vertical indoor farm.
Yeah.
It's a hydroponic farm that's built on a 2-foot by 4-foot wire rack. That's got basically, it's like a wire rack shelving unit that you can get from Home Depot or anywhere. And it's got 4 levels, and 2 of those levels are pretty much like hydroponic trays that can house up to 30 plants each. And then on the top level, we've got a flood and drain pan where we can grow microgreens, and we're growing wheatgrass as well that we juice, for a lot of really amazing nutrients. And so it's even small things, like, even though we're not yet farmers, real homesteaders, quote unquote, we're kind of doing whatever we can, even in a small way, to incorporate that now and not wait. And it's made a huge difference, because just even though we do still go to the grocery store and we still buy a pretty good number of things from the grocery store, it's like, okay, well, now we no longer buy lettuce or bok choy or wheatgrass or microgreen. We're not buying any of that from the grocery store. We've got kale, arugula. We can start a lot of our own vegetables in the hydro farm, and then we can plant them in soil if we want to. We've got a lot of like green onions outside, and We've got just all kinds of, it's really spiked up the number of things that we're growing. And so it's been pretty amazing. It's felt really good. Even just 2 inches more independent than we were before.
All right, at this point in the interview, my internet dropped. So I'm going to spare you the sounds of me clicking my mouse and panicking about having no internet connection, and just fast forward to where the interview resumes right now. We are basically out of time, Miguel. I really appreciate you joining me today. Where can people find you? So you're off Facebook, so that's good, but also people are going to have to look a little bit harder to get to you on social, and you've also got your website. So why don't you tell us about sort of where you're findable?
Well, I am on a lot of different great platforms now. Thanks for asking. People can definitely find me at my website, which is amagi.life, amagi.life. And I've got a page on there, amagi.life/subscribe, where you can see kind of how to join my email list. And I'm also a big fan of minds.com. That's a really good social network that works a little bit like Facebook. And it's also kind of blockchain incorporated, and it's got a lot of cool features. There's float.app, which is another great place for video streaming. And I'm getting my own little content game set up pretty soon here. And so I'll be kind of like streaming to those things like Float, and working on planning to just build a lot of redundancy into my content. So I'll just have it automatically syndicate to Float and BitChute and Minds, and what else? Odyssey is a really good one for sure, aka Library. It's pretty much the same thing.
Right. They just kind of differentiated between the two.
Yeah. And so there's that. But if you go to amagi.life/subscribe, or even just to the front page, you'll see kind of like links for all my platforms. And so yeah, there's that. And so I'm on MeWe, I'm on Parler. And the good thing though is that being off of Facebook, like I'm still on these other platforms, but I certainly don't plan to use them and obsess over them and be as addicted to all of them as I was to Facebook's. So I'm going to focus more on writing for my website and doing videos for my website. And I'm on all the different chat apps like Telegram and Signal and all that good stuff. So yeah, still planning to be plugged in.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Miguel, and I will talk to you soon.
Before we go, I know you were saying we were out of time, but could I take a quick moment to plug one last thing that's pretty relevant to your show?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that we're hosting the first ever Sasquatch Freedom Festival.
Tell me about it.
Up here in the Northwest. It's basically it's going to be really low key this year, but next year we want to go bigger. So we already are kind of thinking long term of it being probably a really cool annual camping weekend for people that are interested in either agorism or freedom cells, self-sufficiency, prepping, liberty stuff, all kinds of, all that counter economics. It's going to be kind of like a spontaneous agora where we're going to come together to camp on the private land of another local agorist, someone who's part of the survival podcast community. And he's hosting us on his private camping land. And I'm going to be upping my production of different things to sell. I'm going to, see if people want to buy my microgreens or kombucha, sell some merch. We're going to learn from different people about different topics like food production or self-defense, gun ownership, stuff like that. So it's kind of, that's coming up November 20th through the 22nd. And the website is squatchfest.site. And like I said, it's going to be low key this year, but people can already look out for next year. We're going to plan some dates and keep that going because we're pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. That's there seems to be those kinds of things kind of popping up all over the place. That sounds like a lot of fun. Sure. I'll make sure to link to it as well. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Hey, thanks, James.
All right. Thanks again to Miguel for joining me for the Urban Agorist podcast. This has been episode 9. That means you can find this episode's show notes at urbanagorist.com/9. And I will have links to all of Miguel's social networks and also to the Sasquatch Freedom Festival, which is taking place this weekend starting tomorrow, November 20th. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you can make it out, go for it. Otherwise, just sign up and keep them in mind for next year. And with that, I'll be signing off. Please remember to rate and review this on YouTube, iTunes, hit the subscribe button, all that stuff. And until next time, live free.
This is the way